Hi guys, Badgie here, and welcome back to another ASMR Creepypasta story. Tonight, we'll be reading The Yellow Raincoat by Sarah Cairns, and this comes from the Creepypasta Collection, Modern Urban Legends You Can't Unread. If you happen to enjoy tonight's story, make sure you like the video, and make sure you subscribe to the channel, okay? There are also other creepypasta stories, so make sure you check them all out. Also, if you guys happen to have any suggestions for other scary stories that you'd like to hear read, let me know in the comments. Sirens, by the way, are on my end. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. They're not coming for me. I don't think. Alright, guys. Without further ado, this is The Yellow Raincoat by Sarah Cairns. This is a bad way to start anything, but I guess I have to be honest. I don't do anything anymore. That's a heavy statement to make, but it's pretty true. Now that this is a recent thing, it's gotten worse. I recently finished college, and like most grads, I can't find a job. You know how it goes. You can't get experience without getting a job, and you can't get a job because you don't have experience. It's a shitty cycle, and it starts to get to you. You can only keep yourself motivated for so long before that drive just disappears. As I was saying, it got worse recently. Most of my friends have found employment or moved away. It wasn't their fault. My social life took a nosedive. I kind of stopped trying. It was like I was too nervous to even ask people to hang out. I had this unshakable fear that somehow, during the process of talking to them, they'd realize what a shitty person I'd become, and that they'd have absolutely no reason to associate with me anymore. Even when I got the courage to ask someone out, I never actually wanted to go anywhere. I didn't have the energy to do anything. The times I did somehow manage to leave the house, I became absolutely drained emotionally. So I stopped leaving my parents' home. Sometimes I didn't even turn on the lights in my room. I just sat there in the dark, checking the internet, waiting for the day to end so I could sleep again. I've always been a dreamer. Maybe it's from having a creative mind or something. Sleeping was just my way of getting out. It was the only part of the day where I didn't feel like I was a complete failure. I had no responsibilities. I could close my eyes, rest, and not give a single shit about anything going on. It was a natural progression that over time I started sleeping more and more. That doesn't make any sense. I started sleeping more and more, but that's okay. The dreams I had while unconscious were interesting, and no matter what I did, I couldn't achieve a single thing in the waking world. It got so bad, I couldn't even be awake for longer than 4 hours at a time. When you're sleeping that much, it becomes harder and harder to keep track of what is a dream and what actually happens. This consistent napping went on for almost 2 months without interruption. Aside from the various shouting matches with family members over how I had become a burden. I knew I should have spent more time looking for a job, but every time I tried, my mind would lock up and I'd just get too exhausted to do anything. Baby part of me had accepted it was pointless to even try anymore. I suppose it was a matter of time before the stress of being alive got to me as I slept. In my dreams, everything was so crystal clear, and the images my mind played out were almost perfect representations of the real world. I could feel the texture of objects, touch anything, and my brain would process it with such unbelievable clarity. Even my dreams started to feel linked together somehow, as if I was watching one story play out. There was always gigantic buildings, like skyscrapers, that twisted and turned in impossible ways. Sometimes they coil around each other, and it almost seemed like they were forming spiderwebs. Just looking at them gave you this dreadful feeling that they were going to collapse at any second. Around the inconceivable formations, you could always hear metal being ground, stretched, and pounded on. The buildings themselves seemed completely impossible to enter. As I looked at the buildings, I noticed a reflection in the glass. There was a figure dressed in a yellow jacket behind me, though I could never seem to find it when I looked around for the source. Even at the reflection, all it did was stand there and watch me from a distance. I wasn't sure if I was even capable of moving, or if it was even capable of moving. It seemed to be completely bound to the reflection of the glass. The dreams always had other people in them. I'd remember talking to them, but at no point would I ever call them anything. It was almost like they didn't have names. I don't even remember knowing anyone who looked like these men and women that populated my dream my mind had constructed. I spent most of these dreams doing normal things, eating, ranting, and gambling on occasion. My dream friends seemed real in their own ways. They each had their own way of reacting to things. They'd talk about family members I'd never met, or go on about their hobbies. It was the closest thing I'd have to real conversation in weeks. It just happened to be my own little dream world. It was like the time I still had friends, back when I made the effort to leave the house. Well, except for one strange moment that occurred in every dream. Without fail, in every dream, one of the people would always ask, "Is it watching you?" in this sort of panicked way. Once, while I was in a dream about a drunken game of tag, it happened between rounds when everyone had stopped to get a drink. One of the people involved grabbed me and dug his fingernails into my shoulder and shouted the question at me. Even in a dream, the list of possible responses to that aren't much more than the stupid, unfitting "what?" After the guy looked at me, seemingly just as confused as I was, and then suddenly, for a single second, it was as if something was watching me, slightly out of sight, but my eyes still picked up that yellow color. Things like that went on for a couple weeks. Sure, it was slightly unsettling, but it still seemed better than being awake. It was easy enough to ignore that one moment of disorientation. Still, maybe I should have paid more attention to what was going on around me. The buildings were changing slowly. It was almost as if they were growing out. They were becoming more complex in the way that they twisted and formed, and the sounds from inside rumbled louder and louder. Once I had noticed the changes, it was only a few days before they had completely blocked out the sky. That's when my friends changed on me. They didn't ask me, "Is it watching you?" like they had every other single night. No, now the panicked words that fell out of the people's mouths simply became, "I should go now. It's here now." I didn't understand what was going on to make everything change. Sure, I'd been sleeping a little more than normal to see how the dreams were going to change, but how was I supposed to respond when these delusions that built themselves as one thing suddenly changed completely? After a while, there stopped being people around altogether, and the air carried an uncomfortable weight to it. When I looked up, I could see that the buildings that entrapped the sky were slowly constricting. The idea of it all falling down stopped seeming like a slight concern, and it became an undeniable reality. The sound that was produced as everything shook and moved around the world was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was a loud pounding that made the inside of my skull feel as if it had been ripped open, like something was slowly grinding away at my brain. Every dream after this point was just wandering through this slowly decaying land and trying desperately to keep my head atop my body. Some nights I swear I could see that yellow thing move just barely out of my sight line. It was getting brave and almost letting me see it then. Still, any attempts to find it on my terms ended up fruitless. It started to mess with me when I was awake. In fact, it stopped feeling like I'd slept at all. My head would wake up pounding, like it had done in the dream. At that point, I tried anything to avoid sleeping. asleep, and this time the dream world was nothing more than twisted metal forming claustrophobic always. The pounding sounds rang out from all around. God, it seemed as if it was the very fucking heartbeat of whatever beast had consumed my dreams. I had to run. There had to be some way out of this place. The sound grew louder and louder, as if it was testing my will. It wanted me to quit, sit down, and just give up like I had on every other aspect of my life. It was in my crazed moment of utter madness that I saw it. At first, I thought what I had found was a large opening, almost like the inside of a chapel. The metal twisted and formed in strange patterns that seemed to symbolize something that was beyond my grasp of understanding. In the middle of the room was where I first saw it. It looked like a man in a yellow raincoat. In a moment of complete fucking stupidity, I yelled, "Hey!" at it. A profound feeling of regret instantly filled my stomach as the thing twitched and struggled to turn around. It was almost as if each and every movement it fell apart. One moment, it looked like some sort of human. The next, it would be closer to an animal. Each and every single breath this monster took caused my brain to scream. It was as if my eyes couldn't process what was in front of me, and the yellow thing was grabbing every memory, every thought, every single day of my life and trying to make it have a shape. It must have known what was going on in my mind, because there was a second among all the chasing occurring in my skull that I swore I heard it laugh. The wailing within my mind grew louder and louder. It must have gotten closer. My brain wouldn't work. It couldn't tell my eyes to shut or my legs to move. I couldn't run. My eyes locked onto it. They were still desperately trying to pin some sort of form to the monster. Through the pain, I saw the texture of its skin. Something about it caused my mind to connect it to the first thing I could think of. A goddamn raincoat. It was so close now. It hid inside its hood. The outside of the eyes stood barely buried behind the black tar-like liquid that leaked from its quote-unquote face. I could feel its breath as it got closer, and I was just trapped there, as if my feet were hammered to the floor. I knew this is where I was going to die. This would be how it all fucking ended. I was going to watch whatever it was devour me alive with the jaws of my mind was unable to fully process. I felt it rip at my skin. I saw my organs sprawled out over jagged shapes still impossible to describe. No tears, no screams. I watched. My mind lost itself to both the sight of it and the pain of every single movement. The last sounds I heard were the grinding of teeth as it devoured my flesh. And then I woke up, covered in a horrible cold sweat. I sobbed and screamed before I finally realized that somehow I was actually awake. Part of me wanted to cry tears of joy after that. None of it was real. I was perfectly fine and everything was alright. It was all just a dream. It was going to be all normal again. It was all a simple nightmare and nothing more. It was freeing in a way. It felt like it was all over then. No matter what happened next, it seemed like I'd faced the worst. Whatever that monster was, it was gone forever. I could get back to being normal. Maybe even start leaving my house again. Everything felt like it was going to be fine, up until that horrible sense of exhaustion snuck up on me. My eyes got heavy, and before I knew it, I was back in the chapel. My arms and legs bolted to the walls. No matter how much I struggled, there was no way to free myself. And then I realized, all around me were the people I'd seen in my dreams, just as trapped as I was. And in the middle of it all was the beast in that fucking raincoat. It approached each person pinned to the wall and slowly eviscerated their forms, pulling and biting and twitching in illogical ways as it did so. Every movement it made sent my mind into a dizzying frenzy. The crushing motions of every single step it took triggered a chorus of screams, slowly building and building until the second it reached me. Its neck snapped and twisted in an indescribable way as it struggled to turn its head toward me. Somehow, during all of the screaming and rampant panic, it allowed my brain one moment of peace. A single second to see its teeth curl into a grin before its hidden eyes flashed an unholy red light. Finally, I felt it. Its nails dug into my legs. I felt my muscles and skin slowly split and rip apart. I was trapped inside the thing's heart. It ruled here, a horrid god within a chapel of metal. Compared to that, I was nothing more than a pathetic scrap of rotting meat, destined to face its jaws over and over. It would never let go of something once it had snuck its teeth into it. Its claws and jagged fangs dragged along the metal walls behind me. Through what remained of my shredded form, I learned one thing in that last moment. Finally, I knew what had caused the sounds I'd heard since it started. Every time I close my eyes to sleep, I find myself in its chapel, torn apart each and every night I dare sleep. When I'm awake, it's difficult to focus for even a second, knowing what monster awaits me in my dreams. It's getting to me. I've been trying to tell myself over and over again it's a dream, but it all feels so real. I don't do anything anymore. I can't. It stops me. It has me terrified of even closing my eyes. I'm not sure how much longer I can last. Even now it's becoming uncomfortably tempting. It would be so easy. I would just have to down all those painkillers. That would stop everything. Then I could rest. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was The Yellow Raincoat by Sarah Cairns from the Creepypasta Collection. Modern urban legends you can't unread, can't unread, can't unread. I hope you guys enjoyed that story. That was a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure if I liked it or if I didn't like it. It's hard to say. It was interesting at the very least. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. Like I mentioned before, if you guys have any suggestions for things you would like to hear me read, let me know and I can take a look and maybe you'll see it in a future